So the techniques so far covered is fabric mâché, when we chop little bits of fabric up, mash it all together, layer it, and on the sewing machine we do some stitching either freehand, so to create swirls, or in the case of this example, I just literally sew different lines straight on the sewing machine to catch all the little fabric in. The next one was the freehand embroidery with more swirls, and we did machine applique using freehand embroidery. This panel, remember, was the tie-dye, and the center panel I've used the machine again to do a traditional technique known as slashing. Need to point out, just to remind you, your actual finished garment, your bustier, doesn't need any of these techniques. I'm just wanting to add to your knowledge base, your skill base of textiles by showing you all these different techniques. But the only criteria of the bustier top that you're making is that it needs to be embellished with at least one technique, and it doesn't have to be any of these. You've got your hand embroidery, you've got hand embellishment with some beadwork, but I'm going to show you now what is possible with pre-made trimmings. So you might remember, we're not going to go out to buy the trimmings, but you might have found something in the op shop, you might have something at home that you've never got used, and you're welcome to use whatever we've got within the textiles room. And I've looked at my stack, and knowing that my theme is the colour purple, lilac, I have found these trimmings. So I've got some lace, I've got a old piece of ribbon. Look, that's all I've got, a little bit of ribbon. What can I use this for? And I've got some star trim that I had for a different project that didn't get used. So although it was bought from a shop, it wasn't used for the project, it's just lying about, so I'm going to give it some life. So these are my back panels. I'm going to work out what I'm going to do with it. So I just want to show you what is possible with pre-bought trimmings. So I wonder, so we're going to, do I like that? Definitely, lace is great, and we've got a box of lace. I'm going to then sew some little sequins or some little beads in the middle of the flowers, I think. Just need to think what to do. So I definitely have do I have enough? It's all very well working out on one panel, but I'm wanting to have it symmetrical, so do I have enough? And the answer is no, actually I don't. So maybe, do I put it across? Do I? As I have, if you remember, I've got the V here, so maybe it would be nice to have the V here. So don't rush in, have a little play, work out. So I'm liking that, and then if I've got it like that, maybe I then can follow that through, and I can have these down here. I definitely have enough. What would it look like? Like this. You've also got to remember time. So I'm just really showcasing skill, different techniques to show you. So I'm really going over the top. Sometimes less is more. So maybe if it was going to be less is more, I might just do one. Or I might just have this with maybe the stars here. Or could I use the stars? I can cut them up, and could I just do one in between each one? That's for me to decide. But really, this little video is just to inspire you on the fact that pre-bought trimmings don't just have to be laid on straight. You can actually do some fancy things with it, something more complex. So how would I go about? So once I've found out what I want to do, what I would do is get the pins out. So you do need to have pins for this. Pin down like this. Now, in order, I could do, if you can see, a line of stitching down here and a line of stitching down here. But be savvy, I actually, if I carefully pin this in place, you can see one line of stitching will work. Now, you can do this on the machine. Of course you can. But as you sew, are you guaranteed making sure that the lace doesn't move as you take the pins out? So you then could, first of all, tack, that temporary stitching into place, then go on the machine. But again, is that doubling up? So sometimes there's nothing wrong with, when it's embellishment, particularly on a product, sometimes it's better just to go do it by hand. Unless you are sewing day in, day out on a sewing machine, your skill base isn't going to be as proficient as the person who does it for a living. And they probably would just line up the lace and go for it and sew on the machine. I don't sew that much, so I tend to compromise, know that I'm not going to get the accuracy that I want on a sewing machine, and I end up hand stitching. And this is the type of embellishment once you've made your top. If you've chosen to use some, say you bought a lacy vest, a lacy singlet from the op shop, and it's the lace that you love. You've unpicked the lace off that, you've made your bustier out of another upcycled fabric, and your trimming is going to just be on the centre along the top. You do the sewing on the machine that you need to, and then you get a hand sewing needle and you basically neatly stitch by hand the embellishment onto the sewing machine, onto the bustier, while you're talking to a friend, while you're listening to music, while you're doing something else. This doesn't have to be done in the class. This is what can be done at home or during a recess. You're there chatting with your friends and you can finish. So this time we're not talking tacking. If I go a bit closer, can you see? I'm calling it stab stitching. So what I'm going to do, I'm taking a tiny stitch on the top. Tiny stitch on the top, and then I'm going to come up again. So it is like a running stitch, but instead of big stitches, I don't want to see them. I want them to be strong. So I'm literally just going to do some tiny little stitches. You can see tiny little stitches. You'll get the pace to hold my embellishment in place. Now I'm using a soft pink colour here. Maybe I should have perhaps tried to match it and get a lilac colour. But because I'm doing tiny stitches on the front, if you can see, you're not going to see them. And then I could just sew up here. And as I'm sewing along, because I wasn't sure how to use the stars, I've just decided what I'm going to do is, if I can show you, I think I'm going to put them in the middle, and that is going to be my embellishment for the last panel. So something to consider when you are deciding what embellishment to include on your actual bustier. It doesn't have to be any of the little examples I've shown you over the past couple of weeks. This is for your folio and for you to grow your skills. You can equally use some trim found from another piece of another garment. Remember, we're upcycling, and that could be your embellishment to meet the criteria for an embellished corset top.